Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Bright Star Intuitive Painting Series. We are on day 7. It is the last day of this painting series. It took me 7 separate painting sessions to finish this painting. I really love how it turned out. When I first started this, there was no way I would have guessed that any of these designs, colors, shapes, any of this would have turned out. And that is my favorite thing about intuitive painting. You start with a rough, vague idea. You don't know where you're going to end up. My plan is for next week to make this into a short so that you can see the full painting transformation. So let's get started with the or mixing up an orange because the goal is to add a tiger lily to this painting. It's already sketched out in that deep yellow, that warm yellow. So I'm going to use Cad Yellow Deep and Cad Red Medium, and this will create a range of oranges that should look similar to a tiger lily. Um, Also, I'm taking creative license. I just happen to like the oranges. And I use my handy um, color cards that I made. So if you are ever trying to make a painting and you aren't sure what kind of color to mix, I recommend checking out some of my older videos on how to make these color reference cards. They are super helpful. Ever since I've made them, I've used them almost every single painting. So I highly recommend checking out some of the old videos and making some reference cards for yourself. Another painting hack that I have, I can't really show you on the camera because my it just is awkward from the camera's angle, but I have a little paint caddy that is stays on my desk and it has a mix of regular, warm and cool, reds, yellows, blues. So I always have those paints in stock, ready to go. Um, and then it's easier for me to just stick with a painting concept rather than constantly stopping to figure out which colors I need. I always have the same paints in the caddy at the same time. So even though I might have these really cool painting tips and tricks like the color cards and the paint caddy, one thing I have noticed about my painting process is that if I finish a painting a little bit more quickly, so like getting into it at least a couple times a week or once a week, I stay in the flow of the painting and I kind of stay connected with the painting and the colors that I'm using. This painting has taken me 2 months to finish. I think actually we're getting into the third month to finish this painting, and I have forgotten where I started with some of the colors. Even while I was looking at these color cards, I was trying to figure out where that mauve color came from. I have no idea how I got that color. None of my cards match it, so it was something that I did in a video, and of course I didn't go back and review the video. So, and one thing I also noticed as I'm doing the voiceover, even my equipment changes. So, I think I started this using a different palette for painting. The brushes that I use are different than when I started. And it's just when I start painting, I kind of grab whatever's convenient and whatever's close by. And so if I'm staying in the painting, I kind of use the same brushes. But if I have large swaths of time where I'm not painting, the closest brush or the most convenient palette is not always the one that I used before. So as I'm mixing these warm oranges, I'm adding a little bit of white to the colors so that I get a full range of oranges because I want to do some layering. When I paint flowers, I do like them to be more abstract and impressionistic. I'm not a botanist. I don't like to paint like I'm taking a photograph. And so I prefer making the flowers as abstract as possible. And that's just a personal preference to flowers. So I'm going to go back in and use the same colors over and over again. When I start putting these colors on at first, I'm using very thin, watered down kind of hints of the color, and there's blue in the background and it's showing through, and so I kind of have to put a couple of layers of paint. So this flower is going to be pretty thick with paint, just trying to cover it up. Also, I'm using straight red and straight yellow. The white does help to kind of cover up the background. So yeah, I just kind of go over this over and over again. And one thing, if I could go back and do this all over again, I might recommend kind of going over this lily with white paint. So if anybody is looking to replicate this painting in the future, I would say that that would be my number one recommendation is to start with kind of a blank canvas on this, only because I'm using yellows and just a very little bit of red, and it's not covering up the blue in the background. One technique that I use when making these flowers is I'm focusing on one color at a time. And I know that a couple paintings ago, I did the mountain birthday card, and I talked about the importance of that, especially if you struggle with perfectionism. That is a really great way to focus on one color at a time rather than focusing on making each petal perfect. And that is really helpful for this painting to just start with. I'm starting with the darkest color, kind of getting in the outline of where the flower is going to be, and then I move on to the next darkest color and I get those colors where I want them to be. And then once the flower starts to look like a flower, I'll go back in and start adding some of those whiter highlights. Um, so yeah, just doing one color at a time really helps. I think for this particular flower, the way that it ended up, it added a lot more depth to the flower by doing one color at a time. And the mountains that I painted, I think that was like 2 weeks ago, um, those also, to me, there was a lot more depth to them because I was doing one color at a time. And so that's just my words of wisdom on painting complex features like flowers and mountains. At some point during this video, I noticed that I have a tattoo on my arm of a triceratops. My goddaughter gave, 3-year-old goddaughter gave me a triceratops tattoo. And so I'm gonna just give you my life advice. If you ever have the opportunity to get a dinosaur tattoo from a 3-year-old, I think you should take it. I think that is well worth it. It was kind of a funny thing to notice that as I was videotaping, I forgot that it was there. So when you have the opportunity, definitely dinosaur tattoos. At some point during this painting process, I started to notice that I was getting a little too detailed on my painting. And my goal was to make it very chunky, abstract, impressionistic, lots of orange, yellow, white, very different colors. And so um, that is one thing that I went back in after and kind of messied it up a little to make it look a little bit more layered. And like I said, the blue started coming out again and again, and so just adding the chunky colors of paint to cover that up. So as I'm mixing all these oranges together in these different colors, shades and tones and tints of orange, I realized that I don't want to have bright white as the highlight because it's going to kind of pop out a little bit against the bright white in the bubble below. So instead, I choose to use a very pale yellow, and that pale yellow just happens to match the stamen in the middle of the tiger lily, and so that pale yellow will look a little bit more realistic. Not really realistic, but adding those highlights, it's just not going to compete with the white in the bubble below. With making these abstract petals with the layered paints and they start rubbing into each other, and then I'm constantly going over with more colors and dipping into various colors, it actually gets pretty addicting. I literally could do this all day. I could just sit here all day. The original uncut video of this was over an hour long before I started editing it. So I definitely got a little into making those petals and just getting the different colors to pop and really enjoyed it. Um, so just know that sometimes it's okay to, get into the details, into the weeds. I'm going to be honest, making a video is probably the only thing that kept me on track and on schedule and kept me, back in the real world instead of fully in a flow state of painting. One of the things that kind of comes up routinely from other people, they said that my artworks looks like pop art because of the bold colors and the clean, dark boundaries. I personally don't know what pop art is, but when somebody described it to me, it's kind of like cartoons. They have those like or a coloring page, but it has those clean, dark lines. And one thing that I've started to notice on some of the original works that aren't intuitive paintings is that I really like bold colors. You can see that in this painting, not a lot of muted colors here. And I really do like those uh, bold colors with strong black outlines, kind of like make it look cartoony. Um, Obviously, I like the intuitive approach to painting, like abstract shapes and ideas. And so those are kind of all becoming signature things in my paintings. One thing also that I notice is I do like clean boundaries in my personal life too. And so there's probably a life lesson hidden in there somewhere. Um, and I've noticed that recently I've been kind of dipping into these fun little life lessons. And I don't really plan on what I'm going to talk about. They kind of come up as I'm painting. So yeah, today's lesson, I guess, is about having good, clean boundaries. So back to the painting itself and less on the life lessons. When I add the statement, I do that very pale yellow, and that kind of is similar to a lot of the reference photos that I used. When I get to the top part, I do use just Mars Black from Ease. I used the Mars Black in the bubbles, but in the background, that was Phthalo Blue and Cat Red. So like the blacks are not exactly matching, but it does work because that lighter black is in the background, whereas this very dark, distinct black is in the foreground. And so then it just makes it look a little different. Um, in order to do the statement, if you are using this as a tutorial for your paintings, I use that detail brush. It's a very, very tiny pointy brush like you would use to sign. So I'm using that to make the statement. And then the little pollen pot at the top of it, I take the brush and I dip it in just a tiny amount of black and I kind of push down and drag it back towards the statement. And so that technique is unique to these particular flowers. The pollen pot is just it's kind of oblong. And so I wanted to just point out that technique in case you are looking at making flowers sometime. Now, one of the first rules of painting is to step back, check it out, and if you see something that you think really needs to be changed, go back in and change it. And the one thing I notice about this painting is that pop art tendency that people notice in my artwork. And this lily needs a border up against that blue. And so I go back in and man, this takes forever. I think I timed it at taking me a good 10-15 minutes to get that border in. And I also added just a little bit of shading. I'm not the greatest with shading. Um, so just added a little bit of shading around the edges and like places where the petals meet each other, kind of where I would imagine some shading would be. So nothing major, but just to get that nice boundary between the water bubble behind and then the some of the petals. And I did try the shading on one tiny little itty bitty baby petal first, um, because I've got that orange paint on the palette. If I didn't like it, I can always clean it. But I really loved how the little dark shadowing turned out. So that is something that I was not expecting to do today, and it just turned out really well. Another thing you'll see me do is jump from petal to petal and kind of from outside to inside and back and forth. By this time in the recording, I had been painting for about 45 minutes, which is about the limit of my sitting still and painting and talking. And I like to get up and move around a lot. So, also this work is very, very detailed. And as I mentioned before, I'm a recovering perfectionist, so I don't worry so much about the details as I used to. So this was kind of like exhausting to be doing this detailed of work. I wouldn't say it was exhausting. I didn't just drop over, but I found that it helped to change from petal to petal and inside and out. And that is also a good strategy for doing longer paintings. I noticed that when I do sketches, I will do that too, where if just working on one spot and getting, mentally tired from that one spot, I'll just shift and go to a completely different spot on the painting or the drawing. And that's really a helpful trick that I have. As always, remember to like and subscribe, and feel free to share this video with anybody that you think might enjoy learning how to paint, or just get started with painting, or even just looking for some new tips and tricks from an amateur artist. As with before, if you would like to see how I reuse and recycle and don't waste my extra paints, stick around. So for today's, environmentally friendly painting, we'll call it, the one that where the paints don't get washed down the drain or get thrown in the garbage, I got a lot of reds and yellows and oranges, and I think I'm feeling a little bit more in the abstract mood today. The last couple of times that I recycled my paints, I made some sunsets and then kind of did a sunset into the abstract. And so I'm just kind of vibing with putting paints wherever they land, not even cleaning my brush in between the colors. I'm gonna start with a red in the middle and just go from dark to light with the reds and see where we end up. So because I kind of have a little bit of a never waste your paint attitude, I don't want to see this black paint go to waste, but I really like the abstract look of this orange. So I'm just going to kind of plop some black in here. And as I do that, I start to realize that it kind of creates a border. And as I start to create that border, it mixes with the very heavy, thick globs of the the oranges and the whites. And so when I make this border, I start bringing some of that black into the center, and I end up with something that kind of looks like fire and damnation, the depths of hell, kind of in that realm when I'm done. So it kind of ended up really cool. I really liked how this kind of abstracty, garbage paint turned out. I didn't mean for it to do that, but it turned out really cool. One of the things you'll notice about the brush strokes, and just I started doing just random brush strokes, but like one thing that I do notice is that I tend to get into like little X's when I'm starting to try to finish up this painting. I'm also trying to blend some of these colors, and so those X brush strokes, they just kind of help. And keeping them as random as possible, that also helps keep it abstract. So that's the end of me recycling my paints. Hope to see you for the next video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.